Okay, I think we're about ready. Yes, we are now recording. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Gaia Education Glocalizers webinar series. My name is Giovanni Charlo. I'm the e-learning coordinator at Gaia Education. Today we bring you a rebroadcast of this webinar entitled Holochain for an Economy of Abundance, a thriving community solutions dialogue on human-centric community development with Arthur Brock, David Armstead, and Ruth Glendinning. Gaia Education works to build capacity on whole systems design, unleashing the emergence of local solutions to global challenges. This webinar is part of that mission for Gaia Education. And we are rebroadcasting the edited recording of this event to complement the launching of our own online course on blockchain and the intersection with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Ruth and David will be available after the presentation to answer questions live on this platform. And I'd like to warn you that we only have limited time for this webinar, so we will keep the question and answers at the end a little short if we can. However, in the chat box, you can see Ruth and David's contact information. I believe, I don't see it yet, but they will put it there, I'm sure. And you can follow up with questions and answers after the webinar. So Ruth and David, I don't know if you would like to say hello to our participants before we start the recording.
Hi, yes, this is Ruth Glendinning here in Austin, Texas, where we are very grateful for air conditioning. So if we could kind of create a thriving community solution for having air conditioned outside, we'd be working on it. Excited to be here today. Discovered that my camera is at the bottom of my screen, so if I look goofy, I'm blaming it on that. So David is here too, but his video is not working for some reason.
But I think my audio is. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi David.
Hi, thanks for all of this wonderful setup.
Oh, I think we lost his audio. Oh.
Okay, they lost your audio, David.
I lost my audio.
Oh, there we are. You're back now. We hear you.
And you're showing up too.
Well, we hear you on and off, but hello, and let's just start the webinar recording that you have sent us.
Very good.
Okay, Pedro, you can run the video now.
Yes, on it.
Okay. It's wonderful to have you both here. Thank you for making time to be with us. This is a very exciting event for Gaia Education and for our public, so thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, truly.
We're excited too.
There we go.
All is good? Okay, here we go. Hello, webinar crew. Hello, everyone.
Hi, y'all.
Greetings to those not in the room. We've had a round of who is. This is Thriving Community Solutions with the Holochain team, featuring Arthur Brock.
A small part of the Holochain team.
who's the best we could get our hands on for the day. And we're taking 3 days here, exploring deeply as we can into several dimensions of possibility that Holochain represent in the domains of community, finance, and crypto technologies. And I'll tell you about Thriving Community Solutions a little, and so will Ruth Glendinning, Arthur Brock, David Armstead. And then Arthur will tell you a little about Holochain, and we'll take the conversation from there. Thriving Community Solutions is a collaborative of professionals here located in Austin, which is focused on understanding how to cultivate conditions that allow households to live together in a way that produces thriving. It's a very local idea. It's an idea that ties to very old human relations, very, very old ideas about making life together. And some of our core findings have been that much of the current world system, let's just call it business as usual, has not been designed with household thriving in mind, has not been designed to optimize as a system around household thriving, individual thriving, and as a consequence has not been put together so that it optimizes community thriving. And we're seeking to understand how to not only revise that circumstance in a way that's both meaningful and nonviolent, but also how to bring forward new technologies that enable that in ways that the past has never seen. Our notion is that there's no upper boundary to thriving. We can always find new dimensions, particularly in the social domains, in which thriving can be nurtured and to occur in yet further and more interesting domains for exploration. So our notions on thriving community also have a flavor of the deep archaic, of the deep past, and hearken to, if you want to consider it an element of mythos or lore, the feeling we're talking about is living in a place where you know who you are in that place, you know the people you live with in that place, and everyone in that place knows themselves as someone who's participating in the production of the thriving for everyone. That no one is left out of that production, and no one is inadvertently left behind in that production. And similarly, no household is left out and no household is left behind. So that the production of thriving is what the community is interested in and focused on. And is the safekeeper, is the holder of the vision that all of us can thrive, and that also sits on top of a feeling that nature really isn't in the business of making a lot of mistakes, that nature knows what she's doing, and that it's not our task to tell one another who to be or what we should become. It's our task to live together in ways that support all of us to explore and understand that. So it's kind of a tribal sense of belonging together and making life together. I'd like to say that these roots have a lot in common with the roots of Holochain and Scepter and Metacurrency Project and Arthur's work, and especially in the commitment to find a way forward for everyone to do well and enjoy their life. Ruth?
I am excited to be part of Thriving Community Solutions. It's kind of the culmination of the work I've done in lots of different kinds of communities. And a lot of those communities didn't have access to opportunity. Now, technology is a great way to start speeding connection, but if you don't even know where the entry point is, you can't participate in a way where you're actually getting access to opportunity. You can have a lot of people talk about how you need to make better choices, but the access to those choices doesn't even exist, and you don't have a language to even ask for it. One of the reasons that I got really excited about Holochain, and I'm absolutely not a tech geek at all, is because I know that Arthur has a great history of actually being on the ground doing things in community. That everything that he's created is about how do we create better access to an engaged human experience, not just how do we create a new stairway for people who already know how to get to the top. So when I'm looking at Holochain and stuff that I've read your interviews and I've looked at other kinds of reviews of it. And there was a lot of tech people who were reviewing it, so that was hard for me. But when I actually started thinking about what was the kind of community space or a platform that would be needed for people to actually bring forward more of who they are in the community, so that they're not just being valued for their financial investment, it's actually all those complex capitals of trust and relationship and family and history that actually allows people to have a shared story of the future. The tool, this platform, Holochain, to my estimation, is the only thing I've seen that actually creates that space for people to come forward and actually start telling more of their story so they can come together and create a better story. And with that, did I take that right? Is that a good answer?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm not even quite sure where to start. Like, it's with all the craziness happening, all the attention and billions of dollars now being thrown at and gambled in the space of blockchain. It's easy to hear blank chain, in this case Holochain, and just assume that it's more of that pattern. And I think I want to back up and set some context. Yeah. Because what you were talking about was the sort of space that it creates. The stuff that this is grounded in for us really is about living systems, nature, community, people. How is it that we communicate and coordinate, for example? Language is one of those big tools, right? Language is one of those major ways in which we coordinate. And a lot of the design principles for Holochain and its kind of parent project, really Scepter, really came from looking at these patterns. And one of the things that we're looking at that we need vitally is what we call, this is going to be a jargon word here for a moment, an unenclosable carrier. Exactly. Right? Which is literally about a space upon which we can communicate or encode communications to be shared, but that nobody can enclose and take control of, right? So what's happening right now in the room, so we've got two carriers going right now. We have one online and one in the room, right? Right now, if I say something to Jody, but David doesn't like what I'm saying, David can't grab the words out of the air and stop them from reaching Jody's ears. This is an unenclosable carrier that we're experiencing right now in the room. However, online, not the case. There are actually a bunch of enclosure points that could shut down the communication that's happening right now between the people online. I don't actually know that much about the Zoom organization, but I'm assuming they probably might be able to shut down the ISP certainly could. There's a number of points in which the carrier is actually enclosed and somebody else can take control of it and interrupt it. This matters in our capacity to organize. And we have some kind of nostalgic images of sort of the wisdom of ancient tribal societies from a social perspective, right? We're not necessarily wanting to model their technology, but we look and see some interesting social patterns there. And what makes sense about that is that they were using this unenclosable carrier in the space. There was an inherent equitability to the means of coordination and communication, but there was also an inherent limitation of scale. So there's only so far that I can shout, right? And if you're not there when I'm doing it, then what you get is somebody else's telling of it. You didn't actually experience it. And so we created things that kind of cross these boundaries of time and space, right? So you can write orders to your generals in the field and send them by messenger, so you can start having empires that spread all over the land. But once that's written on a piece of paper, sent to a messenger, that's an enclosable carrier. Someone can intercept that, someone can potentially fake it, somebody, like, there's a whole bunch of things that start getting introduced that are different than this experience that we're having right now in the room. And if I, carve it on the walls of the cave to make it last, then somebody can stand at the cave entrance and charge admission or whatever and decide who can see it, and, right? It's an enclosable carrier. And what we traded to expand our scale and scope was this equitability. We traded that for, very quickly different classes emerged of priestly and governing classes that were more educated, and they felt it was their job to guard the knowledge and the books. And pretty soon you get this feedback loop where the playing field gets less and less fair, right? And we are now a couple thousand years down the line of some iterations of these evolution of carriers, right? Like writing was one, printing was another, electronic communication, broadcast, radio and TV, and that type of stuff another. The internet gives us a glimpse of kind of that returning to an unenclosable pattern in the way that it's decentralized. But it's really kind of only a glimpse, because you have to have an IP address to be able to play. And getting an IP address is, I can go into the different ways in which it's still centralized. But what our goal is with Holochain is this space, creating a space in which if anybody wants to play in that kind of space, it can't be stopped. At the moment, the weak link is kind of still internet access, and we have some strategies for how to get around that. But the nature of what we're creating is that place to play together. And that's, a fundamentally different ground of being than blockchain in a certain way. But the lesson that's common, and I think the thing that's common about it, I think many people have missed the punchline of blockchain, I think, largely distracted by all of these monetary tokens on it. They think that it's about money, but what it's about is that we've broken up the power pattern of data integrity and data security, data access. Who controls the data, access to the data used to be, we used to have to do this to have the data have integrity. So let me just check. Who here, if you could, would like to log into your bank and change your balance? Yeah, that'd be nice, yeah. So you can see why the bank has some concerns about the integrity of their data, right? Many people would be interested in raising that number a little bit. And so they lock their servers away, literally, behind fortress-type walls, both virtual, both digital firewalls, and in lockdown facilities with limited access. And the people who can actually log on to these things are limited. So when you go in through the web interface to your bank, you're not accessing their main database. You're accessing a copy that, right, and then all the things that make changes to the main database go through a series of checks, security checks and confirmations, and because the data integrity, the integrity of that data is collapsed with the security, the access, who can access that data. What the difference that cryptographic distributed ledger type technology like blockchain or holochain has made is making it possible for us to actually hold something together. We can take down the walls, we can hold it together, and it can be tamper-proof. You can't have people just randomly change their balance. And that sounds kind of simple, but having an unenclosable carrier that you can't fake somebody else's actions or mess with somebody else's actions on is pretty important. That's pretty novel. That gives us new possibilities of how to organize, how to create wealth, how to create thriving. And I just want to also connect back to the thriving frame. Right. We have, Gene Russell on our team is a huge advocate of thrivability. I love that you're using the word thriving, and that you were saying that there's no upper limits. Part of how I think of that is literally the difference between upward spirals and downward spirals. And the reason there's no upward limits has to do with that upward spiral. If you're adding capacities, possibilities, infrastructure, coordinative capacity, that kind of thing, then you keep building on those growing possibilities, on that growing energy. And it's easy, I think, to be lazy in our thinking, in sort of black and white in our thinking. Think about like money or tokens, like as if there's a path, as if it is good or bad. Like if you think about living systems in nature, right? Like water, we need water to nourish life. And yet water also, when organized in certain patterns, when concentrated into gullies and that kind of stuff, is erosive. And it can actually like pull away the soil and erode the water table and actually start destroying the hillside. That which would nourish the hillside in one pattern rips it away in another pattern. And so the trick, I think, is in the relational patterns that we weave. And it's not that a thing is good or bad, it's the pattern that we weave around it. And when we set up money to be doing this concentration of wealth or to be extractive, pulling it out of the system, and not be something that's actually nourishing and building possibilities, we get downward spirals instead of upward spirals. We get, in wealth imbalances and poverty and all of that kind of stuff.
That we're experiencing greatly here in Austin.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let me tie a couple of pieces. So holo is a very interesting prefix you guys picked. Holo has deep implications. There's a whole body of study of holo systems, which if I understand correctly are complex adaptive systems which are nested. And holo systems is what we are. Every one of us with a body is a holo system. In biology, we finally recognize human beings are superorganisms. They're not organisms. And society, a community, is a holo system. It's got nested complex systems. We have to think about complex systems. That's one thing we should probably bring into the picture here. We have to think about complex systems. And part of the intent with Scepter, at least, is to create a non-enclosable carrier process and to create a means for the production of coordination between humans and between what you've referred to as receptors, agents, in a variety of ways that all mimic life, that all actually take a look at how coordination occurs in a natural living system. And it's a good bet that's going to be a wide highway with easy access if we can adapt those lessons. Holo is a very important word for applying to the production of some platform that will let us live in coordination without an enclosable carrier. When I go back, I want to talk about enclosable carrier for a second too. Enclosable as a term harkens all the way back to Middle Ages fencing of the commons pastures. And it addresses a classic problem, which is perhaps not a problem. It's phrased as a problem in economics, called the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons is everyone likes to pasture their cow on it, but no one wants to take care of it. And so when everyone pastures their cow on the pasture that is the commons becomes worthless. But there are many commons where people really have a very active interest in maintaining them. And an example might be the health of our families and our households. And an economic system in which your health care becomes optimized around treating illness, not around producing wellness. And that's an economic process of the system that we can call business as usual. And it is an enclosing. It's not an enclosing of a carrier per se, although carrier enclosure is a big part of getting that to work. But it's an enclosure of the commons of our health, which is a community thriving issue.
And there's a neighborhood outside of Detroit where they haven't had a lot of financial capital, certainly not in the last 10 years or so. And what they've done is they've created their own kind of commons for survival and actually thriving, because what they're doing is observing what their neighbors need if they're going to have family coming in. And they just proactively bring forward what is needed for those people to have this experience with their family. And they don't keep track of it. It's not a tit for tat kind of thing. And what they've done is they've tapped into all of these invisible capitals, you know, the observational capital, the relationship, the community, and valuing in that way. And so when I hear about a story like that, these are naturally occurring systems. So I think of Holochain, I go, okay, wouldn't it be great to go into that neighborhood and then start using that as a way to tap into actually maybe formalize this so that they can generate some more wealth around it rather than just the non-monetary wealth. So there's a lot of naturally occurring systems that have been looking for a tool, a platform to actually formalize this so that they can know that they can have a generational future by bringing in the whole family. They don't have to send their kids out of their worlds in order for those kids to survive. They can actually really keep that next generation and bring that value forward. So these kinds of tools, I think, are super important. And yeah, my late husband was in a wheelchair, so I know a lot about the disability community. Yeah. And I also worked with Choctaw Nation, so I know a lot about rural, native, economic problems. So I think that's why I'm so excited about what you're doing.
And the platform part is critical. You know, one of our insights on community thriving has been coordination between households to produce the living of life. Sourcing the materiality of life locally is a very good idea. It's not the only way, perhaps, but it's a great idea because when you flow your materials and recirculate your materials like you would capital, and you consider those materials like you would capital, for example, water or carbon, you know, we want materials. Let's just say when you can build and then reuse what you used for building, you begin to actually accumulate capital in your village. And that recirculation has a multiplier effect in your village. And we think that kind of local recirculation of capital is a critical issue for thriving. And when we were distant from each other and every place had to be its own producer of life, you had these amazing blooms of wealth production. And wealth meaning the total full spectrum portfolio of capital in that community, or the capacity of the community to continue to expand and thrive, if you want to look at it from that point of view. There was these explosions in places like late Middle Age towns in Europe, where they, as a town, could suddenly undertake projects like 200-year-long cathedral productions, financed locally, just to begin to get some tourism in town. That would be kind of like, this is clearly not a numerical statement, but it would be as if Houston alone decided to do the moonshot in the modern era. This kind of wealth production is really clearly in our history. And it's not something we're enjoying in the world right now. And you go to the rurality, you go out to Idalou, Texas, you go out to the villages in the Sacred Valley of Peru, or you go to Athabascan territories in Canada, and you don't see vast production of local capacity to produce thriving. What you see is real hardship. And it's a global pattern. And we're thinking that Scepter may represent, and Holochain may represent, real opportunities to create local economic platforms that we call platforms of local commerce. And that the local commerce can become complex enough for the production of life from local resources.
Jody.
You've mentioned Scepter a couple times. Could you
Yeah, Scepter, CEPTR, is it's kind of the parent project of all of this. And I'm also just changing some of the video stuff here so we can see questions if they come up. And so Metacurrency is a parent project of Scepter. And Scepter is kind of like our redesign of technology, our redesign of computing and communications and governance and finance, if you will, from the receptive capacity. You could say that it's actually a rebuild of technology in the feminine rather than the masculine. But we didn't set off with that goal. It just turns out that it works better that way.
Can you imagine?
And so that's where we ended up. And Holochain is taking one part of Scepter and making a standalone version, basically to create a contrast with blockchain, to be able to compete directly with blockchain, to hopefully kind of aikido some of what at least I perceive as some of the erosive patterns that are emerging in blockchain, and aikido that energy kind of into a healthier trajectory. But I actually wanted to connect back to like the Detroit community and that kind of stuff. And it's easy, we all know that thing of like when you have a hammer, how problems look like a nail, you know, like it's easy to want to have a tool like this and bring in and try to solve other people's problems. And I really do hope that we're able to solve many problems in the way that you're saying. But I think we have to really pay attention to the fabric.
As you said, patterns before.
Exactly, that relational fabric, because a big part of what's going on there is the relational flows, the communication flows, and sometimes over-formalizing them actually pulls out the emotional connection to them and starts turning them, especially when we start relating to things as numbers. Hopefully we'll get into how many different, like what kind of spectrum of currencies there are, and how many are actually not numeric at all, and how most are not tradable at all. And when I just mentioned the thing in answer to the question about Scepter, about sort of wanting to intercept blockchain and direct some of that energy onto a healthier path, a lot of that has to do with many people haven't recognized, people are saying, well, we're waiting to discover the killer app of blockchain. Actually, I think it's already exposed itself as tokenization. Tokenization is the killer app of blockchain. But who's asking the question about, is turning the world into gambling chips, crypto tokens, actually solving our problems? You know, like yes, blockchain has other problems of energy usage and, you know, different things like that. But even if we set those aside and pretend we're going to solve those problems, if the focus is just tokenization, really is that, I mean, like that, is that flattening, that extractive relationship, the kind of thing that actually specifically yields downward spirals?
Arthur, let me offer a real example. Clay Sturkey brought this one up. So part of what you cite all the time is we want to be thinking of currencies as flows, not as just monetary or something like that. Clay was talking about a daycare, private daycare in Jerusalem. You know that one?
Yeah, it's in Freakonomics. Story.
Oh, it's in Freakonomics.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Where the parents, some of the parents had to have to pick the kids up. Yeah. And the context in the story as a relational network was that's socially inappropriate. That is not an appropriate thing to do. You're making hardships on the staff, and you want the staff to be good and loyal and helpful, and so it's bad for you, it's bad for the school, don't do it. A policy was put in place to charge for that. So you got fined for picking up your kid late, which immediately flipped the social framework from that it was an unethical and socially inappropriate thing to do. 2, that's just the cost of picking up my kid later. It became an economic transaction.
Yeah, and the problem tripled.
It did. It exploded. It exploded. And then they tried to change it back.
And it was too late.
And you can't.
And it eroded the relational narrative.
Which I would say was they mined out the social capital that had been producing the result they had by trying to monetize the transaction. And it put an entirely different set of social capitals at play, which were less complex, couldn't embrace behaviors as shoulds and oughts, and left the school with a real ongoing problem. I don't know what the end of the story was. Do you? Okay. That's what he means when he's saying not all flows, not all currencies are properly tokenized.
Yeah, I mean, two things. First of all, the world isn't fungible.
Yeah.
Right? Like, tokens, part of their nature is that they're fungible. Economic professors will tell us, that this is the nature of money. It should be fungible. And fungible meaning, sorry, jargon word potentially, right? Any unit of it is completely interchangeable with any other unit. So if you have a dollar bill in your pocket, it doesn't really matter what the serial number is on it. It's completely interchangeable with every other dollar bill, whenever it was printed, that kind of thing. That makes it fungible. The world isn't actually fungible. This pound of beef is not equal to this pound of beef when this one's in a living cow. Like, you break the cow. And when we relate to the world as if we can just plug and play all of the parts, we break that relational wealth, which is a fundamental part of living system wealth. And yeah, with the daycare example in Israel, maybe we'll get to that when I don't know, if we do maybe on the financial, maybe in the community day, I don't know. We might look at some of the kind of dimensions of incentives and how there are moral and social and tribal, obligations and incentives at play. And when culturally right now, when you translate those into economic terms, you relieve people of those other obligations, the other social pressure, but you also miss the mark of the social fabric you're trying to create, which is happening in the community in Detroit. And you could still potentially make a digital version of that, but probably not if you're coming in thinking what you're building is some sort of money for moving resources.
Well, but so if we don't commoditize it, we don't say, okay, we want to just create this whole transactional space.
Yeah.
And because what we're really seeing is this transformative energy emerging. And so what I would like to know is if Holochain can be one of those tools where you can transact transformation, can not just transform transaction,
Yeah.
And so that if people see that there's this value in the community of being of service and paying it forward and all that, and that they go, well, I can do that, and I've never done that before because nobody's ever told me that matters. But it's a way that as a community they can look and see what are our assets. Just as, should I tell my kids, stay in this community because your contributions are going to matter in this generative way. And that's just a part of your social fabric. Is like, that's what we believe in this community, is that giving is important and taking is necessary at times, but it's never going to be this transactional equal measure. So if we can find a way to create space for people to bring forward more of who they are and not just say, well, I'm not getting paid for this, therefore I'm not going to bring this talent, idea, energy, whatever to the table, then do you build a different kind of social fabric? I think yes. Yeah. And if what Holochain could be as a platform is this new loom, it's a way to weave this fabric in a new way so that you're getting the warp and the woof and the complexity and the unusual shading and whatever it is, but it's uniquely your community and you carry that forward. So it's not necessarily about tokenizing it so that, that you make sure you get all the eggs back that you gave to somebody else. it's taking those intangible capitals that actually make community a place you want to be versus it's like turning from a house to a home.
Yeah, I think the trick is, at one point you said about the Detroit community that they're not keeping track.
Right.
Well, I would assert they are keeping track, but it's an emotional measure.
100%, yes.
Right? And there's a scale on which we do that.
Yeah.
Right? Like Dunbar's number type stuff, where we keep track of our relationships and sort of, how far are we going out of our way for this person reliably? Are they ever giving back? Not necessarily to you, but to others, or do you see some evidence that they're a contributor, or do they just expect everyone to carry them? We do that kind of emotional accounting. And so the trick is that part of the integrity of expanding the scope of that. So we can only do that emotional accounting on a certain scale, and that's where the whole Dunbar number comes into,
And could you explain the Dunbar number?
There's a anthropologist,
probably named Dunbar.
Yeah, somebody Dunbar, who there's actually a series of Dunbar numbers. The one that everybody cites, so for different scopes of like sort of besties and familial, tribal, and all the way up to like keeping track of names, and there's a series of Dunbar numbers, but most people are pointing to the 150-ish breaking point of that it's hard to do that emotional accounting of the status of our relationships beyond that scale. And
with current technology.
No, just with our head.
Oh yeah. Wow. Okay.
Current socialization.
with our nervous system. And so part of the game that we're in with metacurrency, Scepter, Holochain, is actually being able to take that relational fabric and weave it wider. So you can have indicators. I think David was actually mentioning maps. Part of how we look at currencies is current seas, like the ability to see currents or flows. And currencies, it turns out, are living maps, living feedback systems. When you create ways of seeing them, you can think of it a little bit like the scoreboard in a game. If it's a video game, you can see different things. If it's a board game, the board usually is itself the scoreboard, showing how far along you are, who has what stacks of money, or different things like that. And so that you can see the status, the pattern of flows. Really, that's what currencies are. And money, as far as we're concerned, medium of exchange currencies are just a tiny part. They're like a fingernail on that animal that is currency, that is actual deep wealth. And we, unfortunately, are stuck in some feedback loops right now that make that small part of the picture occupy an inordinately large amount of our attention and imagination. And so it's hard for people to see past, right? Which is part of why all the blockchain stuff's getting turned into tokens and gambling chips. But what I think you need to do for the Detroit level type of thing is you have indicators. The indicators are not about getting it numerically right. They're like thank yous, for example. You could have forms of acknowledgement. So when we do accounting with friends and we're keeping things sort of even, it isn't usually with numbers. It isn't, okay, you bought lunch yesterday and that cost this much, so now I'm generally speaking, in that relational space, doing that type of accounting is a little bit offensive. Not that there aren't some people who do it, but it's kind of erosive to the relationship. Like, doesn't honor some form of deeper relationship. But saying thank you when somebody takes you to lunch isn't the same as keeping score.
Right.
But if you're recording those thank yous, I'm just saying, no, it's a map. It's an indicator.
Yeah.
It points to that a contribution was made. It doesn't say the contribution was $34.86, right? It says, oh, a contribution was made. And
well, and this is what's evolved in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
They just kind of stayed present with the flow,
Yeah.
you know, and they didn't try and
Well, that's the whole point, staying present to something. And so the ability to, let's just use David specifically is a person who creates scorecards in organizations for exactly this purpose.
Yeah.
And it can be for the purpose of having everyone see the same reality about the status of the commons.
Yeah.
So, for example, in West Texas, when I was growing up, there's this huge aquifer from Kansas all the way down to southern Texas called the Oglala. And we were taught it was an endless supply of fresh water. It self-recharged, and we could pull all of it we wanted out for irrigation for farming. And then now, as an adult, it's an ongoing crisis with water supply for the entire region, which has optimized around using way more water than their rainfall footprint. And so the state of the commons, called the Oglala aquifer, is in some places literally a daily report. And it has become something people act on.
Yeah.
Now, there's not any financial punishment at this point or anything like that. There are fines for polluting it and so forth, but none of that's really working. The one thing that seems to, so that's even one of the most well-established called a commons. It's crosses the boundaries of several states, and it's an actual conservation of the commons collaborative effort, which is mainly focused on getting people awake and staying.
But what's interesting to me about this is we act like these things are deep and mysterious, and complex, and when it's literally like water in a glass, right? If you're taking out more than you're putting in, it will slowly be depleted, right?
Even if
it's a huge glass, right? The principle is simple, but we don't want to alter that simple behavior of we can't take out more than goes in.
Yeah. Therefore, issues of growth.
How are we doing on time, Michael?
I'm going to open it up for questions.
Sure.
If okay with you, we have one in the chat. And question is,
Thank you.
can we have an example of how Holochain would work in a local community? Can you answer that?
Sure. We can, but it acts like Holochain is more of a thing than it is. When I talked about it being an unenclosable carrier, it's like if I gave you a piece of paper, a canvas to paint on, to draw on, what would you want to paint in your community? I mean, I could give some examples of things you might paint, but Holochain isn't telling you what to paint, right? It's actually just creating the collectively held thing that isn't centralized, that isn't enclosable. One of the patterns that so I was just sort of snarkily joking about we act out like this Oglala problem is super complicated, but we also do the same thing in other kinds of group dynamics and governance and that kind of stuff where we start things, we start projects, and various projects often fall subject to some form of governance breakdown, some form of fight between the partners, some form of financial takeover, some form of financial breakdown, which then, which starts shifting balances. And because all of these things that we create are actually not on unenclosable carriers, they're on enclosable carriers, they end up getting grabbed by somebody and becoming something that they weren't at some point. I mean, even if it's a big company and it gets acquired by a bigger company, or whatever the thing is, that because of the nature of these things being enclosable, we fall into some of the breakdowns of dynamics because of that. And all Holochain is getting you is an immunity to that. Now, you can use it for a currency, you could use it for a website, you could use it for some other kind of information tracking of participation in water right? So
That
I mean, you could use it for anything, but what it gives you is the means to build something that somebody can't then just come and gobble up and take. It will, as long as the people want to keep playing by the original set of rules, they can keep playing by that set of rules and nobody can stop them.
And speaking to, so I like your answer. I want to bring a couple of points out about it. You had already pointed earlier, you can't just make up something, call it a solution, and take it into a community. That never, ever works.
No.
And ecosystems don't work that way. What those trees over there are doing to process energy and nutrients can only be done right there. It is entirely customized to right there. And the relations that occur between all the plants and animals that live there. When you go into a community to create something the community will use productively for thriving, it has to be sourced from the community. Yeah. This has to be homegrown. So we need technology that allows communities to do that. And one of the things that I could point to, I think, that it is my belief will be a helpful category of technology is community commerce platforms that allow for local currencies, transactional, store value, and otherwise, and that allow the community to recirculate that locally without interference from the outside or without being overbalanced from injections of capital from the outside. And that can help people make visible that which was hard to watch and track.
Yeah,
We'll see.
I just want to connect that actually back to the thing that I had cited from Courtney earlier about the human and the technical needing to be connected. I mean, for me, it couldn't be more obvious than literally somebody from the future could come back and say, hey, we finally figured out how to solve these problems. I've come back to help you solve them earlier so many people don't have to die. And who the hell would listen to them, right? Like, if we don't have a say in integrating, adapting to, making it ours, a technology doesn't magically solve a problem without it being integrated to the human dimension. But worse than that, technologists who tend to think that they will often don't realize the other unintended consequences in the human domain of the solutions. So when they do get adopted, then there's other erosion from not paying attention to this side of things. And so, since today is actually about community, I just want to mention that MetaCurrency Project, if we were just like a couple of geeks in the basement building software, kind of thing, then frankly, I think we'd be full of shit. I do not think you should listen to us at all if that's where this was coming from. And frankly, you should have a healthy skepticism even when I tell you that's not where it's coming from right now. But we do social experiments. We are interested in what are the patterns that work, what are the patterns that nourish. So we, practice these things where, like, my son's school had a meltdown and all the staff quit 2 weeks before school was supposed to open in the fall. And I stepped in as the temporary director to reboot and rebuild. And it's like, if I can make some slight changes to the educational model, I'll step in and do this. It was already what was called a free school, self-directed learning. Students design their own education, which was awesome. Mm-hmm. But it was called a democratic free school, which maybe more truthfully should have been called a bureaucratic free school. And because the processes that we have for doing these things democratically, they're really good at burning lots of hours. And when you're in a school where if you don't have a curriculum that you have to be managing to, they can burn lots and lots of hours. And with just making some small tweaks, literally to currencies, right? Like we use currencies in school. We realize that a grade is a performance metric currency. Credits you get for your courses are a unit of account, counting your course hours in different domains, right? The degree is a reputation currency. These are all currencies in the way that I talk about currencies. This school didn't use any of those that I just mentioned. But what we started doing was setting up visibility of flows. We got a 15-minute morning meeting that we tried to get basically all of the required things done, attendance and all that kind of stuff. But we had people say, what are you doing today? We had these little boards that they put sticky notes up on with different columns on your mark, get set, go, finish line, you know, and then people could see each other's progress and intentions and activities. And you could also see the people who had no intentions and are just like, nah, I'm not going to put anything up there or whatever, who thought they were cool at first. But then when they started like watching everybody else be really happy and fulfilling those intentions, they were like, wait, maybe this isn't so cool. Maybe I do want to do something. And it actually created, in this case, a visible positive peer pressure. But it was peers. It wasn't us saying, why aren't you putting anything on your board, right? It was just like, let us see where you are so we can support whatever it is you want. And just that alone as a tool helped shift that culture of intentionality such that there was just a lot more productive creativity instead of kind of just hanging out and texting your friends on the couch. And I mean, there were other types of things in place, but when I say currency, I mean something even like that. Place where intentions are visible is a currency.
And for a felt sense of the depth of this, so we've just talked about things that have to arise from the community, which is the same exact human trait as intentions for the day have to arise from the kids.
Yeah.
And when they do, they begin to feel engaged and participatory. Very important sense of self, very important sense of place. And so just to describe this, I can remember a day when I was standing in the Amazon in an Ashore village. And these are very, very strong people. And the day began at 4 a.m. And everybody just gets up. And it's not daylight. And, you know, because I was a guest, I was assigned to one household. So I'm standing there. The fire is where they cook. It's the kitchen. Fire was where they were cooking. We were standing there at 4 in the morning. And what is the family doing? They were sharing their dreams. And the papa and the mama and the grandma and granddad were commenting on, well, if that's what you dreamed, you might think today about this is the kind of things today may hold that you need to do. Their whole system of dream interpretation isn't psychological. It's what is implied for action. But slowly the dads and part of the moms would circle into the village fire as the sun began to come up. And what was going on at the village fire was chit-chat about what do you want to do today? Which was really a town hall planning meeting. What are we going to do? Right. And yes, everyone's predilections and talents were taken into account. But that didn't mean anybody had to wear permanently the role of being a smith or a miller or a painter every day. Yeah. It meant, how are we going to get done today in the village with what we have to work with, what needs to get done for us to thrive, including everybody. And that was the conversation. And it was, as you said, via unenclosed carrier. It was also a conversational network, has the characteristics of having high bandwidth, high connectivity, and high computational capacity, because brains are pretty good pieces of work. So given those three things, we can imagine ourselves at 4 o'clock in the afternoon as the workday wraps up. What used to happen in my childhood was you go home to dinner. And if you mess with that, you're messing with the economics of the household. Because there was no just in time. There was purchasing that went on for the week and the month, and the mom was watching the money. Now, with cell phones, what happens at 4 o'clock is there's an explosion in conversational coordination. Everybody's calling everybody else in their household about, do I pick it up? Where do you want me to get takeout? You want to meet me somewhere? Dinner is just in time. It's a complete shift in the social practices. And it feels like the old village framework. It starts to feel more natural. People feel in their household a sense of some liberty and some connection and some generality of the role they play to take care. The boundaries around their feeling of what would it be, stewardship for household starts to be renewed instead of the old, I just punch in at work and I come home and I sit down at the table and I read the paper and that's the end of my obligations for being a person that has a participatory role here.
Right.
That flavor has come back. It's an interesting sense of how groups, particularly small groups, coordinate to make the living of life. And I think sector represents real inroads into returning our technology to a framework that can accommodate that kind of living of life and coordinating life from that. And one reason that's true, if that is true, is because it started from apprehending how people could live life that way and asking the question, how could we enable this? Very important, very different approach to technology design.
Well, it feels like it creates a space for more complex engagement versus this isolated story of here's my screen and that's my entry point to the world. You're interacting with people. You're being responsive to the other kinds of stories and forms of capital as they're coming forward. You're staying in the flow of the community versus trying to just get your one entry point and disconnect.
Interwoven. I forgot the punchline about the story with my son's school is, that the Agile Learning Centers have now doubled every year since then. We're now...
That's what you call your school.
Yeah, Agile Learning Center, which we're ending the school year with 30-something schools this year. There's another 30-something startups, so next fall we'll probably have 60-something schools. And so far we've been doubling every year since then, and it's spreading rather virally by just focusing on creating healthy patterns of flow. These currencies that we don't normally think of as currencies because they're not money. They're literally just how do we see the social flows that we need to and that kind of thing. So I just want to make sure that we're engaged in keeping all those things integrated.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for your Wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you, Ruth and David and Arthur. I know Arthur is not here right now, but thank you both for providing this recording. And I'm sorry that we only have a very little time left, but I wonder, Ruth or David, if you have anything you would like to add now that the video is completed.
Hi,
Yeah.
David here. I think a piece that needs emphasizing is that top-down models and packaged solutions don't work because communities are not plug-and-play platforms. So we have to keep in mind that what we're trying to learn here is much more integrated to the natural systems processes than we normally really allow ourselves to connect to. We have to think about how a neighborhood and the grandmothers and the children in that neighborhood actually would use or become integrated to whatever our initiative might be in that community. So I want to say that I think it's critical that we think about thriving and the production of thriving, starting from households and individuals, and thinking about how between and among households we can really help each other lift life locally, lift life together and among ourselves, and become more locally mutually co-evolving and mutually codependent, or mutually thrivally dependent, as opposed to having sort of the very common systems view of big patterns that are presumed to be reproducible everywhere if you just take the pattern and apply it.
Very nicely, well said. Ruth, anything you would like to add? You can unmute your mic if you do.
Hi. First, I hope y'all enjoyed this, because it actually, and I know I was very active during this because I got so excited. David and I were reminded that this is a pretty cool thing that we did. And you kind of forget because there's so much that you have to deal with day to day, right? So we were excited by it, but mostly we're excited that everything we thought would happen is kind of happening. So as I said in the chat, it's inspired us to make some little videos and some little conversations talking about some of the projects that have come forward and the ways that we can all build a collective wisdom around this future, so that we're actually helping each other go forward instead of competing for the story. So thank y'all very much for being here. It's been super exciting.
Very
Even
nice.
for somebody who knew how it was going to end. So.
Well, I think this is some new territory we're exploring, and it definitely is very exciting, very promising. We don't know where it's leading, I think. I don't know if you have any inclination, but what do you think this is going to lead to? Or have you, maybe you have discussed that among yourselves in the Thriving Communities Solutions Network?
Well, what has been really amazing, and I just finished, we just finished submitting a proposal for an incredible opportunity in LA yesterday, but it doesn't, it's equally as exciting for a project that we're putting together in Helvetia, West Virginia that has 67 people. And then I have a meeting next week with Choctaw Nation, which is the third largest Native American tribe in the United States. The idea, the long-term goal is to create a sovereign economy. So what we're finding is if literally we focus on the roots and we stick to the wonderful model that Gandhi laid out with village economics, where we're producing our own thread and our own cloth, that we have room for everybody on the planet, because there's, you know, we all are engaging in our productive capacity. And one of the things that we've really found to be true and valuable is focusing on women's work, is saying that this is the work at the community level that helps deepen the roots of who we are and helps tend the garden of a future. So this is what's super exciting, especially with Gaia, because that's kind of what y'all do, you know?
That's right.
And we'll teach everybody to say y'all. That's our goal. So
yeah. Well, maybe we can all move to Texas and it'll just be by osmosis.
Well, you know, I'd recommend moving to Texas in the winter. You wouldn't like it in the summer.
I agree.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you, David and Ruth, very much for being present and accompanying us with this presentation. As I said earlier, unfortunately, we have another event scheduled right budding, and we're already taking up a little bit of their time. So
no problem. Thank you.
Yeah, I will need to cut this one short, but I want to tell all the people attending this presentation that we do have a course on blockchain and their connection to the SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We're launching this course on Monday, the 17th of June. And those of you who are in this webinar can take a 20% discount on the course, on the cost of the course, if you do so within the next 24 hours. Also, if you can gather some friends, you can take advantage of a 4 for the price of 3 discount, which is actually a little bit better than the 20%. And so that course is quite interesting. We'll try to include some of the materials that Ruth and David have provided in that course. Perhaps the PDF that you mentioned, Ruth, we can also make it available there, so there is a little bit more information. And besides that, let me say that Gaia Education has many courses on sustainability design, design for sustainability. We run courses in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. As we're speaking, these courses go on all year. There are different topics: social sustainability, economic, ecological, and worldview sustainability are the topics that we present in these courses. The 3 languages are, the same course is delivered in all 3 languages. And I also like to invite our audience to come and join us in our social media and come to our website, sign up for the newsletter so you can keep up with all the ongoings with Gaia Education. So thank you very much again, Ruth. Thank you, David. Thank you, Arthur. You're not here, but you know, we know that you are here. And adios.
Bye.
Bye-bye.